Communications technology now offers an apt metaphor for God's all-seeing, all-knowing presence in the world.
It says in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, in the Ethics of Our Fathers, that there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears, and everything is transcribed in a book. And now we see that instantaneously things are seen, heard, and recorded anywhere in the world by anybody. The knowledge can disseminate. There's no physical barrier. There's no place where the knowledge can't reach now. We know when we send a radio wave, it doesn't just go where people have radios. It's going where people don't have radios. In fact, a radio wave goes out into space forever and ever and ever, and if you want to go catch it and you have a nice big enough radio, you'll pick that up too. You can get the St. Louis Cardinals game from 50 years ago if you want to go far enough in space and you have a big enough radio.
You take this knowledge that we have and use it to express age-old truths about God and godliness in the world so that people could turn on a television, the internet. People could use all of these existing technologies and use them as means to deepen their connection to God.
Do you think there's a God?
I don't know. He's never come and said, "Hi, I'm God," so I really couldn't tell you.
I believe that there is supernatural powers beyond what we see in the rational world.
I believe in heaven. I believe in going there.
The great paradox of the modern world is that while science often describes and helps us appreciate the reality of godliness underlying creation, at the same time, the spiritual dimension is hidden and concealed from us. This hidden nature of God also has a purpose.
God has created a world where He creates the possibility for human beings to altogether deny His existence. It's by His design that this world is a perfect concealment of God's existence. Why did He do it? He wants something that should come from us. In order to accommodate that, He has to completely erase His steps. He has to completely remove Himself so that having a relationship with God should not be a deduction. Worship Him, but rather it should be a personal choice. And He wants us to discover Him, as Abraham did. He was the first Jew. To discover Him, recognize His existence, and moreover recognize that it's in our best interest to worship Him.
When you create something from nothing, that thing has to constantly have a motor which makes it run. And that motor is God. The moment God says, close the motor, everything vanishes. And therefore everything must be God, and God is everything. However, God is in His great abilities, was able to make even things that don't look like God, but really they are God. The areas which are totally negating God, that is also God.
Wisdom comes from God. Now let's think about this in simple terms. Every one of us has had a problem, intellectual problem. What do you do when you're confronted with an intellectual problem? You think about it. You try various strategies. Let's suppose you fail. What do you do then? Sleep on it overnight, try it again the next day. Suppose you try the same strategies over and over and they fail. After a certain number of times, often an answer comes. Where did it come from? A spiritually sensitive person knows that these insights that come from nowhere come from capital N, nowhere. They really come from God. The spiritual dimension here is to feel yourself in touch with God, to feel the gift that God is giving to you. It's a challenge to see God in the physical world. It's a challenge to see God in the history of man. And it's a challenge to see God in one's own self.
The gift of free will offers mankind a choice. We can try to see His presence in the world, or we can choose to ignore it.
By the same token, we can look at our modern technological advances as gifts from God, or we can fail to appreciate their godly purpose. We can even turn God's gifts against ourselves.
We have the capacity for the first time in history to destroy ourselves. Then that forces the question, who am I? What are we? What are we going to do with this capacity? We're not playing anymore.
Free will is the most profound gift that God has given man, because free will is one of the great dichotomies of existence. In His infinity, God has created an impossibility, a logical impossibility. We are totally governed by Him, and we're free. We're independent of Him.
According to the same mystical writings that predicted the explosion of material and spiritual knowledge, we can use our free will and technological capabilities to spread the word of God, perfect the world, and bring on the Messianic age.
Maimonides cites it very clearly. He says, "Will be a time where there will be no war and no famine, there'll be no jealousy and no hate, because the world will be fulfilled with the pursuit of knowledge, divine knowledge." So materialism will no longer be an end in itself as it is today. People just making money in order to make money. It will be a means to a higher end, to serve God.
If we are living in a world of unprecedented unity, and a world filled with divine knowledge, is there any reason why war, sickness, and human suffering exist in a world that an omnipotent, omniscient God has created?
The first 6,000 years of history, corresponding to the first 6 days of creation, are years where the world is going through growing pains, self-perfection and correction. And the 7th millennia is a perfect Sabbath-like rest where God's essence is expressed in the world.
These 5,760 difficult years that we have experienced in this world are only a preparation. This is equivalent to a pregnancy. So that with God's help, we are collectively going to give birth to the great redemption